Assalamu alaikum everyone, you're watching SamiSpeaks. My name is Sami T-Nassim. It's good to be back with you all again. We've got a big show for you all this week. We've got a lot to get into, a lot to discuss. What did I want to have a look at this week? I wanted to have a look at lilyjay, right? There's some controversy surrounding this lilyjay. Who is this lilyjay? Don't really know much about her myself, but she tweeted on Twitter a tweet, and she references her Christian friend, and she says, my Christian friend has passed away. And she quotes the Quran and she says, perhaps, or at least alludes to the fact that perhaps her Christian friend will be able to enter Jannah, right? Is there any truth to that? And then also, I wanted to have a look at the controversy surrounding her charity work, right? So we're going to have a look at that at the outset of the show, inshallah. We're also today going to be having a look at something very important. There's a podcast that's released by the Financial Times, one of their podcasts, The Story of Money, where they have a look at the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they have a look at his life from an economics standpoint. Whether the Prophet Muhammad was a capitalist, they look at him being a merchant, they call him a businessman, right? And they're not just talking about the Prophet Muhammad, but they're talking about him in a positive manner. The comments are flooded with positive comments. This is a British publication, right? 200,000 views, one of the most hyped video. YouTube's introduced this hyped feature. One of them, and you can hype this video right now. Yeah, yes, you can. You can hype the video right now. But YouTube has introduced this hyped feature, and the podcast is being hyped, right? They're loving it. The people are loving it. So I wanted to have a look at that, of course. But before we do have a look at that, I wanted to have a look at this 9-page booklet, this 9-page leaflet, this guide that has been released by the UK government, right? By the Home Office, more specifically, which urges asylum seekers, or at least they're claiming it urges asylum seekers to not commit crime, but not just commit crime, but to not harass and even rape, right? Is there any truth to this? Because I'm seeing Ben Shapiro, these idiots already misquoting this and just saying they're rubbish as per usual. So let's get straight into that, inshallah. So the government, the UK government, the Home Office releases a 9-page guide, a booklet, a leaflet for refugees, for asylum seekers, right? So while they await their claim, they give the asylum seekers these booklets to read and to learn from, right? So what is this booklet? So it's a 9-page booklet, and it outlines the norms, the societal norms, the behavior that you should display in the UK, and all of this, right? Now, within this booklet, it talks about crime, right? And it says that if you commit crime like rape, right, but not exclusively rape, you can see the media, the far right, have sort of attached to the rape, right, and the word rape, and saying, oh my goodness, they're telling asylum seekers and refugees that they can't rape. Shouldn't this be obvious? Well, yeah, of course. Why don't you put two and two together, my friend? Shouldn't it be obvious? Of course it should be obvious. It is obvious, right? This is the premise. Why should the government have to say this? They don't need to say it. But they're clearly, and I'm going to get back to it, but they're clearly releasing this purposefully to create a problem, right? To create a problem. PRS, problem, reaction, solution. This is very, very clear what they're doing here. In fact, before I get back to the booklet, if we actually look at the booklet itself, it's a 9-page booklet, right? In 2019, there was already a booklet like this, a 44-page booklet, pretty much the same thing, right? But just longer, more detail. So why do the Home Office even need to introduce this when they already have one in place? They already had a booklet like this in place and you didn't care, but you only care since Wednesday, since it was released. So do you see the point I'm making here, right? This was something that was already in effect. They already had a booklet urging asylum seekers to just follow the law, right? As really any country that has an asylum system will have guides which will essentially welcome the asylum seeker and say, look, you can't do such and such. So this is not new. We already had our booklet since 2019, our 44-page booklet, and now it's been revised to a 9-page booklet. Did it need to be revised? Well, of course not. But the reason why they've revised it is to anger you, is to infuriate you. I'm sorry to say, I don't like this word myself, but it's to gaslight you. and you fell for it. This is the obvious. Why would you need to tell migrants and asylum seekers to not rape? You don't have to tell them, but they are publishing this, they're putting this out on purpose. The media already clinged onto it and was already reporting it, all of the major publications here in the UK. And by then the far right had saw it. Zia Youssef of Reform UK, I believe the shadow Home Secretary of Reform UK, or the Foreign Secretary, he already said, oh my goodness, why would you have to say this? Why would you, And that's the thing, you don't have to say this, right? But they're clearly putting this out here on purpose so that they can anger you and infuriate you and divert your attention and divide the populace, further divide the populace. It's very clear what they're doing here. But we could we could carry on with that. Ben Shapiro makes a video discussing this, right? And he says the UK, something along the lines of the UK government releases booklet urging Muslims not to rape, urging Muslim asylum seekers not to rape. What are you talking about? Urging Muslim asylum seekers not to rape. Where did you get Muslim from? This is for asylum seekers. This is not exclusively for Muslims. What is the framing here? And this is the thing. Ben Shapiro will come here with an American audience and he'll say these types of things and there'll be no checks, right? There'll be no oversight. There'll be no scrutiny. And I saw his comments. They're all agreeing with him. Aside from the comments that are anti-Israel, of course. But they're in the United States, so they don't really know what's going on here. What are you talking about, Muslims? What is your problem with Muslims, Mr. Shapiro? You make a movie, Run, Hide, Fight Infidels. I know, well, no, we're not just talking about Islam. This is ISIS. We're talking about ISIS. This is not about Islam. But in the trailer, you're talking about Islam generally. And then you make this title talking about, Muslims instead of it actually just being asylum seekers and migrants. When most asylum seekers, migrants, immigrants coming into the country at this moment in time are not Muslim. In fact, they're Indian. They're Hindu Indian. They're Christian Nigerian. Right? They're atheist Chinese. They're not Muslims. So what is this point you're making, washed up Mr. Shapiro, who can barely get any views as it is? So you have to infuriate your base and say Muslims. What have you turned into? I thought you were supposed to be this educated guy. You turned into Jake Lang. You turned into Jake Lang, Tommy Robinson. You've turned into these low IQ idiots. Sorry to say. So this is, why are you talking about, if you're going to talk about our politics, at least get it right. At least get it right. That's a separate note. The Home Office has released this booklet. They didn't need to. Like I've said, I've made the point. We already had a booklet in place. We had a 44-page booklet in place in 2019, released in 2019. And that went through everything there. But they've revised it. They've given it to the media. If they didn't want the media to see this, then they could have easily hidden it, right? But they've clearly created a problem, and therefore a reaction has ensued. And this is how they work. This is clearly divide and conquer. And that's what's happening right here. We're not questioning the government. We're not questioning who is allowing these people into the country. We're not questioning why we have no one at the channel and why we have no one actually supervising our borders, right? But no, we blame the Muslims instead, like Mr. Shapiro does. So I wouldn't have spoken about this if it weren't for what Ben Shapiro, how he framed his video, because I thought it was absolutely not just distasteful, completely disingenuous, completely low IQ, right? Very cheap of Ben Shapiro, very cheap, but that's all we're getting from him. And that's all really we're getting from our own government too. And the far right, of course. So think about these things before actually reacting. Think about who's making these decisions. Think about who's releasing these booklets. Because it ain't the Muslims. And really, it ain't the migrants too. They're going to come here. They're going to, you know how long it takes for them to get here? Right? and you're saying it's their fault. It's the government's fault, and you're blaming the Muslims because it's an easy victim, right? But why don't you look at the top? Look at who's making these decisions. Look at the government, not just Andy Burnham. I'm talking about people way above Mr. Burnham himself. But yeah, inshallah, we can discuss. We can discuss this podcast. This is much, much better. This is a beautiful podcast by the Financial Times, right? One of their podcasts, The Story of Money, which is basically an economics podcast where they talk about all sorts of things, essentially money and capitalism and import and export and trade and tariffs. And they talk about all of these different types of things, right? Liberalism, classical liberalism, and they've done a few episodes. It's a relatively new podcast. But what I saw, like I said, a hyped video, one of the most hyped videos in the country, in the top 10. I think it's either 6 or 7. I think it's either 6 or 7, right? In the charts, the YouTube charts. And it talks about the Prophet Muhammad, right? It says, was the Prophet Muhammad a businessman? Was he a merchant? Was he a capitalist? It asks that question. And it talks about the political philosophy, political theory of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So let's get into that. It's a very good podcast. It's only about 40 minutes. You have a PhD graduate in Islamic studies. You have a German banker who is the guest of this podcast. He has written a book on Islam and Islamic economics. And I'm not going to try and act like they get everything right in this podcast. They get a few things wrong. But the overarching premise of the podcast is one that is very positive, and the comment section is filled with positivity about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Even non-Muslims, right, appreciating the life of the Prophet Muhammad. But like I said, the German banker who is the guest of this podcast, and then also a journalist, right? So they talk about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they talk about his life, his early life. They talk about how he was an orphan, how he lost his father before he was even born, how he lost his mother at age 6, how he was raised by his grandfather until he was 8, and then thereafter he was raised by his uncle. And they talk about his early life. They talk about him marrying Khadija, and they talk about women in Islam. Think about this. They talk about women in Islam during the Prophet's time, and how Khadija, radiallahu anha, they talk about her and her success story as a successful businesswoman and a merchant. And they say, you know, if we look at any point in time, any century, even today, it's hard to find women in business in 2026. But 610 AD, you've got Khadija as a successful merchant. You've got the Prophet's great-grandmother, I believe, being another merchant, successful businesswoman. Wealthy women in Islam at that point in time during in Mecca and Medina. And they talk about this, and they say, well, you know, if we look at the media stereotypes of Islam, this is completely contrary, it's completely antithetical to what the media portrays, right? And this is 3 white people saying this, 3 non-Muslims saying this, right? But intelligent, educated individuals from the Financial Times, right? Financial Times, if you don't know, is sort of a centre, really the only major publication we have here in the UK, and economically quite right-wing, right? So that leads us to the economics of the podcast. They talk about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they talk about where he stood politically, right? And they talk about him when he fled to Medina. They talk about him opening up a market, right? And the first market he opened up, him saying that there should be no tax on this market. This is a tax-free market, abstaining from tax, right? And they talk about the Prophet Muhammad, the Sahabi coming up to the Prophet Muhammad and saying to him the prices are too high, right? And the Prophet says that the prices are determined not by anything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And they talk about how the Prophet had a small structure in governance, a very small minimal state. And they link that to classical liberalism, right? Where you have a small, limited government, a minimal state, right? And they say that economically, the Prophet isn't too far from capitalism and classical liberalism, right? And they also speak. They spoke about the women. They spoke about the economics, but they also speak about the Prophet in general, right? And how he was as a person, and how before he received revelation, how he was already quite successful as a merchant, had married Khadija, like I said, at 25. The fact that she was older than him, and he was 40 when he received revelation. The fact that she was 15 years older than him. They say she was not just wealthier than him, but a senior, right? So this podcast as a whole is very positive. It displays Islam in a very positive note. And this is really what I wanted to get to, is that any impartial, unbiased person, there's only one destination. And at the end of the day, it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who guides. But anyone who's impartial and unbiased can see it as it is, right? Can see that Islam, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was not just a good man, but the best man. The best man, right? With not just a good heart, but the best heart. Okay? And they speak about this. And they speak about the character of the Prophet. How he had a clear track record in pretty much any endeavor. How he never lied, he never stole, he never cheated. Right? So they speak about all of these different types of things. And this is what happens when you're impartial, when you're unbiased. We have the far right, and we have these people, and they are blinded by their own ignorance. They're ignorant. This is the problem. They're not educated. They are ignorant people, right? The podcast alludes to the tax, zakat as one form of tax, but they talk about the jizya for the non-Muslims, right? And when you actually look at the far right and you draw the link, and they talk about the jizya, they're uneducated. They don't know what the jizya means. It's a tax on non-Muslims, and if they don't pay it, then they're going to be killed. It's like, no. There's punishment for anything and everything. If you look at the jizya, back then, it was 1 gold coin, right? During the Prophet's time. That's how much annually the non-Muslim had to pay in a Muslim land. 1 gold coin, which today is like, what? A few £100. It was later revised by Umar radiallahu anhu, where he revised it to silver instead, and it was more tiered based depending on where you sat economically. But even then, like silver is even cheaper then. So we're talking about annually paying a few £100 jizya, right? A tax, like we don't have taxes in this country. With these individuals paying income tax, council tax, national insurance, VAT, road tax, taxes everywhere, inheritance tax, property tax. And as a non-Muslim, you have to pay 1 tax. You don't even have to pay the zakat. All you have to pay is a few £100 annually. These people don't know what they're talking about. When you're impartial, when you're unbiased, when you don't have a narrative, when you're not being influenced by, who knows, Tommy Robinson, Ben Shapiro, these Lawrence Fox, these people who don't have a clue, with the greatest of respect, don't know what they're talking about. When you see it from an educated standpoint, from someone with a PhD and a German banker and an educated journalist who have actually studied these issues, and as Muslims we would say not enough, but at least they know the bare minimum, and that's all it takes. That's all it takes, is to know the bare minimum. And you'll see the beauty in Islam, and if Allah guides you, Allah guides you, right? But it is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala whether you are guided or not. So even with the most logic and the most reasoning and the best arguments in the world, they're blinded. They're blinded by their own ignorance, and they will continue to be. If that is what is written for them, we could really bring the best evidence. We could literally bring concrete evidence empirically proven evidence and cross-referenced, and they'd still be ignorant because they are, or arrogant, more specifically. But yeah, I thought that was a fantastic podcast, and this is what's going to continue to happen. The dam is breaking. We've seen this sort of influx of far right, the loony far right and the far right garbage and the rubbish coming from that side, and it's hit a point now where we've had enough of it. Like during the Biden years, we had this wokery, and then it settled down, and it's gone now. And the same thing's going to happen with the far right, right? They've talked about immigration. People are like, we're getting sick of it now, all right? Small boats are lower than they were last year. Refugees are down. Net migration's down 82%. What more do you want, right? What more do you want? But you'll continue to be gaslit because you are you fall for it every time. Of course, fell for it award, fell for it again award. It is, isn't it? Before we close, at the outset, I wanted to have a look at lilyjay. lilyjay is an Australian social media influencer, right? So she's a social media influencer. She's a revert to Islam. So she reverted to Islam, as far as I'm aware, a few years back. She started uploading videos about Islam, more like short form videos on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok. And she started doing that a couple of years ago, right? And she's gathered a massive following, a massive base, millions of followers as far as I'm aware. Hundreds of thousands of, if not millions of views, hundreds of thousands of engagements, likes, comments, shares. And, she's talking about Islam. She's talking about Islam in a positive way. And she is debunking some theological discrepancies in Christianity and all of this. And you can't not say that she probably has brought people to Islam, right? Now, her being on social media is a conversation in and of itself, but the reality here is that she's on social media. Should she be on social media? I would say she shouldn't be, right? But she's on there, she's a revert, she's new, she's probably got a lot to learn, as we all have. But the real controversy here is that she started a charity foundation called the lilyjay Foundation, and there was, I would call it a hit piece, to be honest with you, but there was a hit piece, an article by ABC News, not to be confused with ABC News in the United States, owned by Disney, but more so the Australian Broadcast Corporation in Australia, where they uncover the reality of her charity work, charity endeavors, saying that, a lot of the content that are on the foundation's pages are AI generated. Okay. So essentially what they're saying is that the videos that they're publishing, the foundation is publishing on behalf of lilyjay, is taking real world videos of someone else and putting lilyjay on that person, right? So it's not actually lilyjay there. And then also AI generated children, adding children, not to say that there aren't children in the videos, but adding more children and adding a plaque card that says lilyjay Foundation. And it's all AI generated. This is what ABC News is claiming. Is there any truth to that? She said that, I'm doing charity work. I will concede we have used AI in some of our videos, but the charity work is honest, it's truthful, it's what we're doing. And then there was all, other stories on a bakery, right? Claiming that, she opened up a bakery in Gaza, and that ABC News were claiming that we can't locate, the bakery, and we can't prove whether she actually opened it or not. She's come on her own show and she's said that, we've got the proof and all of this. The reality here, though, is that what actually went on here, a lot of people are protecting her. I'm not here to protect her. But what I will say is that she's obviously a big influencer with influence, with followers, with, people that are interested in what she has to say, right? And in Australia, if she is an Australian, think about the influence she has here in the UK. So what do you think? You think about the influence she has in Australia. But if she is uploading videos on Islam, Christianity, and she's bringing people to Islam, right? then all the Australian authorities, you've got to bear in mind this ABC News is actually owned by Australia, right? It's owned by the government in Australia. It's like our BBC, right? It's state-run. It's a state-run media company. So you've got to think about it like this, you know, perhaps it is a hit piece. Perhaps what they're saying is true, but would they say it for anyone else? I'm not here to protect her. I don't even know much about her, to be completely honest with you, right? For some reason, everyone's talking about her. So, you know, we're trying to give the most Islamic answer and perhaps rebuttal. We are going to give a rebuttal to her tweet in just a second, but we have to assume the best. She is still a sister. She's done nothing to take her out the fold of Islam. We should assume the best in what she's doing. She has conceded that she's used AI, but maybe she just used AI to make it look bigger than it actually is. Is there consequences to that? I would say yeah, probably, because why are you faking, making it look bigger than it actually is? We don't want to do that. That's cheating, right? But nevertheless, we've covered that. What I also want to cover today is her tweet. She tweets about a friend of hers, a Christian friend of hers who had passed away, right? And she references the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, and she talks about a verse where they talk about Christians and Jews and the fact that they have nothing to worry about if they were practicing and all of this. Now, this is a very difficult tweet to discuss because she's referencing the Quran, but she's, as far as I'm aware, incorrectly referencing the Quran. This ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah is talking about before Islam, before the revelation, right? Before revelation. So there was no Quran. There was the Torah and the Injil. There was the Torah, the Jewish Bible, and there was the Gospel. But there was no Quran. So, and really the Islamic, if you want to know the Islamic opinion on this, it's that if there is a Christian who, or a Jew, for that matter, or anyone for that matter, who dies and had never had Islam revealed to them, essentially died upon ignorance, right? Never heard about the Quran or the Prophet Muhammad or anything like this, whether Christian or Jew or anyone else, they will be resurrected on the Day of Judgment, and they will stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they will be asked to enter the fire. They'll be asked to enter the fire. And if they do enter the fire willingly, it will be as if nothing happened, right? It'll be safe and cool for them. And they will enter Jannah, right? They've passed the test. But if they do not enter the fire, if they reject, if they say no, then they will be banished into Jahannam for eternity, right? Forever. Just like the kuffar. And that really is the kuffar who have learnt about Islam, right? And know about Islam and researched Islam. Islam been revealed to them, and yet they still rejected. They said no. Then yes, they will be banished into Jahannam. This is not controversial. They will be banished into Jahannam for eternity. No question. Right? Allahu Alam, but no question. So that really is, I mean, the Prophet has a hadith on this where he talks about the four exemptions to this rule, being the blind, the deaf, the ignorant, of course, like we've mentioned, and then also the mentally incapable. So essentially the disabled, mentally disabled, and the Down syndrome, mentally retarded. That's got a bad rep, that word now, but it still means the same thing with good intention. Mentally retarded people. Those are the four exemptions, and they will be tested on the Day of Judgment, and they will be asked to enter the fire. And if they do, then they will pass that test. So that is really the answer to lilyjay's tweet. But in 2026, this is hard to imagine because we've got we're in the information age after all. We're in the technological age, right? So it's very difficult with all this technology and all this information to not hear about Islam. But you know, it still can be the case, I guess. But I guess that answers the query of lilyjay. I think what we need to take from this is we need to understand that putting yourself on social media is not a good thing to do, right? I would say to anyone who wants to do this, it's not the best thing to do, because there are more negatives that come from it than positives, right? Yes, you can have the success and all of this, but it's in this world, right? What about the next? Because whenever you put anything online, whenever you do anything publicly, that's something that is rarely forgiven. That's a public sin. We know about this as Muslims. So, lilyjay, we can only ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide her, to make her better. And if I was her, to be honest with you, I would just completely ditch everything. I would delete all my channels and I would completely ditch all of this and I'd focus on myself, right? We should be grateful. We should all be grateful we're still alive and our heart is beating. And we actually have time left in this dunya. Because the moment we do not, we can't right those wrongs. We can't ask for forgiveness. We can't make tawbah. So, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide lilyjay. We also ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us all, of course, I mean. I think that ends our show. Great note to end our show on. It's been a fantastic show. We've had, we've discussed a lot. We've gone over a lot. Next Sunday, I will see you, inshallah, to discuss whatever is going on then. But as always, I've been Sami Tina. Again, I'll see you next Sunday, and assalamu alaikum.